A very important order that just came down in the Brad Pitt versus Angelina Jolie civil lawsuit. So this is not to be confused with any sort of divorce proceedings or custody dispute. This is a civil lawsuit that Brad Pitt filed against Angelina Jolie, and then Angelina Jolie filed a cross complaint. So now they're both suing each other for millions and millions and millions of dollars. Okay, so it's going to be one of these cases. Now, as we said here today, this case is actually going to go to trial. This is, unless they reach some sort of resolution or settlement, this case, as we sit here today, is going to be going to trial either sometime in 2025 or 2026. So a very interesting trial to follow. And we're going to be breaking everything down today in today's video. In case you have not been caught up, we're going to break everything down to see what Brad Pitt's going to be arguing, what Angelina Jolie is going to be arguing. And now you're going to be perfectly situated to be able to follow this case as it continues through the discovery process. And we still have Brad Pitt's deposition that's going to be taking, most likely Angelina Jolie's deposition is going to be taking. So very interesting things are going to happen in this case, and you got to be all caught up to date. So we're going to catch you up today. This was a case that was filed a couple of years ago, but this is a very significant part of the case. What happened in this order? Well, this order essentially requires Brad Pitt to turn over certain documents that have to do with his alleged abuse, his physical abuse of his family, which would include children, on a specific flight. And that may also in turn show other instances of abuse that perhaps, again, allegedly he abused either Angelina Jolie or their family. Also, some evidence of his alcohol abuse. So these documents, text messages, emails that may have to do with something about that. This order was just entered that compelling, requiring Brad Pitt to turn over these documents. And that's what he has to turn over now. Now, you may be wondering, what in the world does this have to do? Why is this relevant with a civil lawsuit? We just said before, this is a civil lawsuit that was filed on behalf of Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt filed this lawsuit against Angelina Jolie seeking money damages. So what is the fact that whether he abused his children or not, or whether he abused Angelina Jolie or not, what does that have to do with a civil lawsuit? Maybe you can make an argument for divorce proceedings or for custody disputes. I can understand why that would be relevant. Why is that relevant over here? So that's exactly what we're going to be answering today in this video. We're going to be going through the background on this. We're going to be going through some of the complaint, the second amended complaint, and then we're going to be seeing what Angelina Jolie's response to that is. Not everything, but what she filed in her most recent filing, and what her position is going to be, what Brad Pitt's position is going to be, and how this dispute is coming out. And that way we're going to understand why these documents have any sort of relevancy at all to this lawsuit. But I will warn you at this point that it's going to take a little bit of time to get there. So if you're in a rush and you just want to get a quick 5-minute synopsis, that's not what this video is going to be for. You have to understand the different moving parts here. You have to understand how this all started. And therefore, it's much better if you just grab some popcorn, get a drink, and sit through this, because we're going to be going through everything step by step to really understand what's going on in this lawsuit. Okay, so that is what we're going to be doing today. But hopefully after today's video, you're going to be completely caught up with this lawsuit. And I think it's very interesting what's going on here, legally speaking, and just how this all works out, just factually speaking. So we're going to be jumping into that in just 1 second. Before we do, I do want to make a mention that there is a charity that I am collecting for. I need to raise some money for this charity. It's a charity that I am personally going to be taking part of a tournament. Yes, a ice hockey tournament that I am going to be playing in order to raise some money for this amazing, amazing organization and charity. They help out families that were stricken with cancer and are dealing with all the stress and all the emotions and all of the financial responsibility of that. You can just imagine what that does to a family. And this is an organization that gets in there, steps in, helps the family, holds them by the hand, and to provide them with all this extra support that they need as they're going through this crazy, crazy time. So I'm going to leave a link in the description. Donate whatever you want, $2, $3. There's no amount that's too little that is not worthwhile in donating to this organization. So if you can help me out and just help me raise a little bit of money on that, that would be helpful. All right, now let's move on to what happened in this case. So we're going to be pulling up the second amended complaint, which is the latest version of the complaint, and going through some of the factual allegations. Now let's just understand that as we're going to be going through this is going to be Brad Pitt's version of events. So this is his allegations, what he's arguing. And then after we're done with his version of the story, we're going to go into Angelina Jolie's version of the story and see what she has to say in response to this. All right, so here we go. Pulling it up right now. Factual background. Pitt and Jolie acquire Miraval. And I'm sorry, some of these names are in French, and if I mispronounce them, I apologize. I'm doing the best that I can. All right, here we go. Chateau Miraval SA is a French company that owns a residential property and vineyard located in Correns, France. So this is a company that owns a property and a vineyard. When Pitt and Jolie first became interested in purchasing Miraval in 2008, so we're going back to 2008 now, that's when they became interested in purchasing this property. Chateau Miraval SA was owned by Quimicom SA, which we're going to refer to as Quimicom, a Luxembourg limited liability company. Quimicom and Miraval were then owned by a hobbyist who operated a small, unprofitable wine business on the estate. So that's important. This is a wine business that was unprofitable when Pitt and Jolie acquired it. To effectuate their acquisition of Miraval in 2008, Pitt and Jolie each established a California limited liability company. Now, when you're people like Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie, or you're anybody, and you want to purchase a property, definitely if you're someone like that has a lot of worth. So you don't purchase these properties on behalf of your own individually. What you do is you create a company, you create a corporation, and then this corporation, even though you are the owner of this corporation, but you gain a lot of advantages by having this company do your bidding. Essentially, that's how it works. There's definitely levels of protection that you personally will be protected if you do your business through these corporations. So Pitt created a corporation. He named his entity Mondo Bongo after a song featured in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the film that Pitt and Jolie were making when they met. Jolie named her entity Nouvelle, the middle name of one of the couple's children. So they each formed their own entities. But make no mistake, Mondo Bongo is 100% owned by Pitt, and Nouvelle is 100% owned by Angelina Jolie. Jolie formed Nouvelle for the sole purpose of holding her interest in Quimicom and in directing Miraval, and nothing else, right? So that's the only reason why she created this entity, Nouvelle, and presumably that's also why Pitt created this entity called Mondo Bongo, but we'll see. Through Mondo Bongo, Pitt paid roughly 15 million euros to acquire 600 shares of Quimicom, constituting an indirect 60% ownership interest in Chateau Miraval. So now Brad Pitt, through Mondo Bongo, owns 60% of Chateau Miraval. So this is the property that they're buying, this vineyard and this residential property. Pitt now owns 60% of it. Through Nouvelle, Jolie paid roughly 10 million euros to acquire 400 shares of Quimicom, constituting an indirect 40% interest in Chateau Miraval. So now you have a 60-40 split. 600 shares were bought by Pitt. He paid 15 million euro. 400 shares were bought by Jolie. She paid 10 million euro. So now there's a 60-40 split. Pitt owns 60% with his company, and Angelina Jolie owns 40% with her company. Pitt and Jolie subsequently leased the estate for appropriate consideration from Chateau Miraval. Now, what happens? How do they develop this land? When Pitt and Jolie purchased Miraval in 2008, they envisioned that it would serve as a private home for the couple and their family, and that Pitt could develop its vineyard into a successful family-owned wine business for the long-term benefit of Pitt, Jolie, and their children. So this is going to be a family-owned wine business, which will hopefully be in the family for a long time. They don't envision breaking up, and they're going to have a family, and this is a way that it can be passed down through the family, make sure that the family has a profitable business. As Jolie put it, they bought Miraval as a family for our family and intended it to be a family business. From the time of the acquisition, the couple agreed that Miraval was in need of renovation, particularly if the grounds were to support a viable wine business and serve as a flagship property used to advertise and promote that business. So they needed to invest in this property. They needed to do some renovations. As Jolie has publicly acknowledged, it was Pitt who took responsibility for the architecture and renovation of Miraval. Miraval was Pitt's passion. Indeed, in this very action, Nouvelle has stated that by agreement, oversight of the couple's investment in Chateau Miraval was left in the hands of Pitt. So Brad Pitt took on this entire responsibility. This was going to be his activity. He's going to renovate and take charge in making this a profitable business. While Pitt had been led to believe in the run-up to the purchase that the existing wine business on the estate could pay for itself, that was not true. So I don't know what happened in what led up to the purchase of this property, what due diligence was done, but apparently Pitt was sold not such a great property, right? And he was led to believe that this is a wine business that could pay for itself. This is already profitable. You'll be doing great. All you got to do is buy it, and then you're just going to be cashing checks. Essentially, that seems to be what he was sold, and he was not exactly sold that. That wasn't the reality. The reality was that the business was losing money each year. Initially, Pitt and Jolie determined that they would invest in Miraval through loans through Quimicom on a pro rata basis, reflecting their respective 60-40 ownership interests. So now they have to go and invest in this property. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, very simple. You own 60%, I own 40%. We'll put in the money in respectively with that type. You'll put in 60%, I'll put in 40%, and that is how we're going to put in the money, invest the money to renovate and make this a profitable business. That makes sense. After all, we have a 60-40 ownership interest. But in 2013, in the midst of renovations, Jolie stopped contributing. So all of a sudden, Angelina Jolie says, you know what? I'm not going to be investing into this property anymore. Jolie's business manager explained Jolie's reasoning. Although Angie is very excited and pleased about the changes to the property and knows that Miraval is going to be a beautiful home for their family, her decision to direct films instead of act left her unable to afford further contributions. So she can't afford it. Okay, so even these movie stars at some point cannot afford certain things. So that was her position. She's not able to put in any more money into the investment of this property. Well, now what are they going to do? They're trying to turn this around into a profitable business. They just bought a big lemon, seems like. So what are they going to do about this? Well, this is what happens. Thus, as both Pitt and Jolie by then engaged to be married, so they were engaged at that time, recognized unless Pitt continued to finance the development of Miraval, the couple's plan for their family estate and business would be derailed. Meaning, unless Brad Pitt takes this on himself, it's going to completely fall apart. They're not going to be able to make any business on it. They're not going to turn this into a profitable business, and it's going to be done. So what happened? Well, let's see. By late 2016, Pitt had invested nearly $50 million more in Miraval than had Jolie. This meant that Pitt had funded roughly 70% of the couple's investment, while Jolie had funded the remaining 30%. So Brad Pitt, even though it was supposed to be 60-40, turns out that Brad Pitt actually put in 70% and Angelina Jolie only funded 30%. These percentages and amounts were reflected in accounts that Jolie's business manager would later send to Pitt. In making these investments, Pitt was assured, based on, amongst other things, the couple's years-long relationship and marriage, their joint vision for Miraval as a family-owned and operated business, her assurances to him that she shared that vision and would not disrupt it, Pitt's transformation of the estate into a private residence for the family, and Jolie's willingness to allow him to invest in a manner far disproportionate to his relative ownership share, that as a matter of mutual and binding commitment, the couple would hold Miraval together, and that if the time ever came, neither could or would dispose of his or her interests separately without the other's consent. So we kind of see where this is going. They agreed that we are doing this together. And if at any point, for whatever reason, one of us wants out, well, you're not just going to sell your share to somebody else without my consent. We're doing this together, and therefore you got to get my consent before you just decide to sell your shares. For many years, Jolie honored that commitment. As Jolie assured Pitt, while he continued to make disproportionate investments even after their separation, all of Miraval is based on an event we both say won't happen, meaning a sale of Miraval away from the family. So this is, we don't want this, we don't want Miraval to ever get away from our family. We're not selling it to third parties. It's staying in the family. That was the whole point of doing this. Pitt would not have made these investments but for the rights Jolie owed him and these promises she made him. So now Brad Pitt is only making these investments of millions and millions of dollars because Angelina Jolie essentially told him and assured him and promised him that I'm not just going to turn around and sell my portion to somebody else without your complete authority. All right. Again, this is just taken from the complaint. So let's just calm ourselves down. In case you're on the Angelina Jolie side, we're going to see how this all plays out. But this is all Brad Pitt essentially talking. Okay. So now what happens? Pitt also made these investments in Miraval in reliance on the written contractual rights that ran between Mondo Bongo and Nouvelle. Several months before, Mondo Bongo and Nouvelle are just Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's companies that they created to buy this Quimicom, this property. So there was some contractual rights that were between these companies. Several months before Jolie announced that she would cease investing in Miraval, Mondo Bongo and Nouvelle converted Quimicom, the Luxembourgish entity through which Pitt and Jolie held their downstream interests in Miraval, into a private limited liability company renamed Quimicom. In contrast to an SARL is the Luxembourgish business entity that's commonly used for private family businesses. So this is just some corporate lingo about how to rename a business, which is generally used for private family businesses. So that's how they restructured this. But while they're doing this, to effect this conversion on March 25th, 2013, Mondobago and Nuvo, which is just another name for Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie's companies, agreed to the Quimicum Articles of Association. So they're agreeing, these companies are agreeing to these Articles of Association in Quimicum. Well, what do you think those articles say? Well, we're going to see. See Exhibit 1, a separate but consistent agreement from the commitment Pitt and Jolie made with each other directly. So now they made a agreement and commitment with each other personally, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie personally. And now, on top of that, their companies, Mondobago and Nouvelle, now the companies are now bound by specific agreements which are found in these Articles of Association in this company called Quimicum. And what does that do? Which significantly restricted the transfer of Nouvelle's or Mondobago's Quimicum shares. So it restricts your ability to just transfer your shares of Quimicum. Section 5.4.3 of the Quimicum Articles prohibits the transfer of Quimicum shares inter vivos to non-shareholders without the approval of 75% of the shareholders. So quite clearly is that in these association documents, which now both Mondobago and Nouvelle agree to, is that you cannot transfer, sell, give, gift. You can't transfer any of your shares to non-shareholders unless you have the approval of the other shareholder. That's essentially what this is. 75% of the shareholders is going to be one or the other. You need them both, essentially. Okay, so you also have this idea. All right, so let's just move through this. So they were not allowed to now, based on these association documents, also they're not allowed to sell it to third parties. We kind of see what's about to happen, right? Okay, well, let's see. In December 2013, shortly before he and Jolie married, Pitt, through Mondobago, entered into a transaction that transferred 100 Quimicum shares, or 10% of Quimicum, to Nouvelle for the sum of €1 never paid. So this is just one is nominal. It's called it's just €1. It's like $1. Such that Mondobago and Nouvelle each nominally hold a 50% interest in Quimicum and by extension Mirabeau. So now let's pause it right here and understand what's going on. Initially, it was 60-40. It was 60% owned by Brad Pitt, his company, and 40% owned by Angelina Jolie's company. Now, right before they're about to get married, they say, hey, let's make this 50-50. After all, we're about to get married. We're going to be equal partners, I guess, in everything in life. So let's just make this 50-50. And that's exactly what Brad Pitt did. He gave over another 10% of his shares. So take 10% off 60%, that equals 50%. And now they both own exactly 50% interest in Quimicum, which again, Quimicum by extension is Miraval. So they own this residential property and this vineyard 50-50. At the time of the transfer, Pitt and Jolie understood that if they ever sold Miraval, their respective proceeds from the sale would reflect their 60-40 ownership split as further adjusted for Pitt's disproportionate investments, not their nominal 50-50 ownership interests that were affected through a transaction that lacked any consideration. Okay, so they agreed that even though right now technically it's 50-50, but if this is ever going to be sold, well, then Brad Pitt deserves to get a little bit more because he put in much more money and he put in all this work to develop this land, to develop the vineyard, and therefore he's going to get 60% of the proceeds of the sale, and she's only going to get 40%. So even though they technically own this entity now 50-50, but that's going to be the split if it ever gets sold. Pitt would not have undertaken the separate transaction absent the contractual relationship between the parties, ensuring neither could unilaterally alienate their interests. So again, this all is going to come back to this idea that you can't know, each party is not allowed to unilaterally just go and give your interest to somebody else, sell it or gift it, or however you want to give it to somebody else. It would have made no sense for Pitt to contemplate giving up a majority position in Quimicum if Jolie could freely dispose of her stake by selling her interest in Miraval to a third party without Pitt's knowledge and consent. So Brad Pitt is in a 60% ownership, right? He's obviously the majority position. He would never give that up unless he knows for sure. This is what the complaint is saying. Unless he knows for sure that Angelina Jolie is not going to just give it away without his knowledge and consent. So this is all just showing that all of their actions that are being taken is with this understanding. And that's important when it comes to implied contract issues. Okay. In accepting the 10% interest, Jolie, in a sophisticated party who, like Pitt, brought a significant independent assets into the couple's relationship, further manifested their understanding of the same. Okay. So now the next section of this complaint is just going to say that under Brad Pitt's stewardship, Miravel all of a sudden flourishes. So he puts in all this work. It's going to say that he put in all this work, and he developed the right relationships, made the right partnerships, and now all of a sudden this Chateau Miravel becomes incredibly profitable, and it's just doing amazing. And they show some pictures here. Okay, very nice. All right, so he's doing great. And now what happens? Okay, well, September 2016, this is when the trouble is going to begin. On September 19th, 2016, Jolie filed for divorce. Discussions quickly turned to the couple's assets, as a lot of times it does when you're getting divorced, and especially when you have high net individuals like this. You got to figure out what's going to happen with their assets. Well, okay, so you got September 19th, 2016. You got this. Angelina Jolie files for divorce. From March to May 2017, Pitt and Jolie, along with their respective business managers, Warren Grant and Terry Bird, worked out an $8 million loan from Pitt to Jolie for the purchase of Jolie's new California home. Okay. In tandem, they discussed how to allot Pitt's and Jolie's respective ownership interests in Miravel in the event that Pitt bought out Jolie or of a joint sale. So now they're talking, okay, now we're going to do with Miravel. Now we got this problem with Miravel. Right now we're getting divorced. So now Jolie still is a 50% owner, even though she only is going to get 40% of the proceeds. Okay, but we got to figure out what to do with Jolie, with Miravel. Throughout the discussions, Jolie and Bird promised Pitt that Jolie saw Miravel as a center point for them and their grandchildren, and that any sale would account for Pitt's disproportionate investment. So again, any sale is going to take into account all the work and investment that Brad Pitt did in this property, as opposed to Angelina Jolie, who didn't really do much. In March and April 2017, Pitt and Jolie discussed exactly what the split would be in the event of a joint sale, with Jolie at one point informing Pitt that she was amenable to a 68-32 split. So now she's completely fine with a 68-32 split. Jolie assured him, "I will only take what I put in, and I don't take anything you put in the future." Again, she reiterated, "I can't imagine the day this is a reality. It's a gift to our children in the end. It's not even ours, really. It's an investment and business they will inherit." So this is all for the kids. We're doing this for the kids. So we don't have to worry so much about whether it's going to get sold or not. We really want this to stay in the family. In May 2017, Pitt agreed to provide Jolie with the $8 million loan for her new home in California. Over the next few months, Pitt and Jolie continued to discuss how they would split the proceeds in the event of a joint sale of Miravel. Throughout the course of these negotiations, Jolie never questioned Pitt's right to a large majority of the proceeds from any sale, or suggested that she could or would sell her interest separately without Pitt's and Mondo Bongo's consent. So again, they're continuing to talk about what they're going to do with this Miravel, with this property, with the vineyard, and discussing if they're going to sell it or sell her portion, what they're going to do with the proceeds of the sale. And again, it was never questioned that she's only going to be able to get 38% or whatever amount less than Pitt, because he put in so much more work. To the contrary, she vowed to Pitt, "I agree, it all has to go if it goes." Jolie also never expressed any doubts about the value of Pitt's contributions to the business, or that Miravel reflects his vision. Instead, she proposed compensating Pitt for his role in overseeing the investment. As Jolie explained through Bird, Jolie did not want to restrict Pitt creatively, because she believed in his design and trusted that his decisions would bring additional value to the property and business. Bird conveyed this message to Pitt. Jolie would not seek any control over the renovations and enhancements to the property and business. The 2017 discussions between Pitt and Jolie eventually stalled due to Jolie's insistence that Pitt contribute many millions of dollars to her foundation. So now all of a sudden, Angelina Jolie is going to start looking, again, this is all Brad Pitt talking, but now Angelina Jolie is going to start looking ridiculous. She's going to start looking unreasonable, because now the discussions are stalling. Why? Because Angelina Jolie wants Brad Pitt to contribute many millions of dollars to her foundation. But these discussions reaffirmed and reinforced the parties' mutual and binding commitment that notwithstanding the divorce proceedings, they would hold the Miravel together, and that neither Jolie nor Pitt would sell his or interest separately to a third party. So they're trying to show all this time, it was very clear. It was very, very clear that they're going to work on this together. No one's just going to go behind somebody else's back and sell their portion of this, their interest in this property. The discussions were also consistent with the Quimicum transfer restrictions, which imposed a contractual obligation on both Mondo Bongo and Nouvelle to offer the other a right of first refusal over their separate interests in Miravel. So again, if you do want to go, what the Quimicum Association documents say is that if you do want to go outside of this agreement and you want to sell it to a third party, you have to give that option first to to your partner, which would be Brad Pitt in this case, the right of first refusal, meaning, okay, I'm ready to sell this. I want, I don't know, $50 million, and I have a buyer ready to buy it. I'm going to give you the opportunity first to buy it from me for $50 million. So that's the right of first refusal. And that was also in the documents. Okay, so now it goes on and says that Brad Pitt continues to work on Miraval and expands it and makes it more profitable and all that good stuff. All right, so let's move on. Okay, there's more negotiations that Angelina Jolie has with Brad Pitt. They talk about that. And again, just kind of show that Angelina Jolie understood that she's not allowed to just go behind his back and sell it to whoever she wants. All right, continue. Here we go. Jolie secretly negotiates the sale of her interest in Miraval to the Stoli Group, a Russia-affiliated spirits conglomerate. The truth, as documents recently produced in this litigation now confirm, was simpler. Jolie had been secretly negotiating with a third-party buyer, and in the wake of the adverse custody ruling, she no longer wanted to sell Pitt, notwithstanding her contractual obligations and years of assurances to him. So there was, and I guess they must have talked about this in the earlier part of the complaint. Okay, yeah. Well, this is important, so we got to go back over this. Because this is going to get to their custody battle. As Miraval continued to grow in value, Jolie expressed renewed interest in cashing out of the enterprise. Thus, in mid-2019, Pitt and Jolie resumed discussions about Jolie's potential exit from Miraval. Right out of the gate, Jolie abandoned her earlier promise to only take what she put in. Instead, Jolie, who now had the benefit of the $8 million loan, demanded that all negotiations be based on her nominal 50% stake in Miraval. So all of a sudden, she's completely changing her position. And she's saying, no, I want 50%. Not just that I agreed to 60-40 and then I even agreed to a 68-32 or something. I want 50%. And on top of that, she just got a loan from Brad Pitt, $8 million loan to buy her California house. But notwithstanding this reversal in position, Jolie still recognized that she could not sell her interest in Miraval without Pitt. While Pitt disputed Jolie's entitlement to half of Miraval, he was nonetheless prepared to buy Jolie out, either in whole or in part on reasonable terms. The parties exchanged various proposals concerning the terms that would govern a partial buyout. So now they're talking about, okay, well, there'll be a partial buyout between Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. So Brad Pitt will partially buy out Angelina Jolie. In January 2021, Jolie wrote to Pitt that she had reached a painful decision with a heavy heart. And there's an entire letter that Angelina Jolie wrote to Pitt. And there she writes that she reached a painful decision with a heavy heart. The partial buyout Pitt and Jolie had been negotiating, in which Pitt would purchase a portion of Jolie's stake in Miraval, and Jolie would thus continue to share in future appreciation of the business, was off the table. As Jolie explained, she had purchased Miraval with Pitt as a family business and as a place where she believed they would grow old together. But Jolie claimed, given her personal objections, she could no longer maintain any ownership position in an alcohol-based business. So now she just doesn't want to have to do anything to do with an alcohol-based business. That cannot be something that I'm involved in, and that's not something that I really want our kids, to be involved in either. So therefore, the partial buyout is just off the table. I just want out. According to Jolie, who herself had collected millions of dollars in endorsement fees from Miraval throughout this period, her decision was prompted by Miraval's recent ad campaign, which featured Pitt's personal image to promote Miraval Rosé. Reflecting her and Nouvel's contractual agreements with Pitt and Mondo Bongo, as well as the parties' course of dealings and conduct to date, Jolie explained that there were two ways forward. So this is all part of the letter. And she's telling Brad Pitt, look, there's two ways forward now. The first was an outright sale of Miraval by both Pitt and Jolie jointly. In this scenario, Pitt and Jolie would jointly market Miraval to third parties. So they just want an outright sale. We're just going to completely sell the entire property, and we'll split however we decide to split the proceeds. The alternative was a complete buyout of her share. So Brad Pitt, you want to hold on to this? No problem. You want this to be your baby? You work so hard making this into a profitable business? No problem. The only other option is that you have to completely buy out my share. So before they were talking about a partial buyout, now she's saying, look, either we're going to sell the entire property or you got to buy out my share. by Pitt or parent, in which Jolie would sell her entire stake to Pitt and or with Pitt's consent to his trusted business partner. Jolie conveyed the same message to Perrin, which is just Brad Pitt's business partner, explaining that she did not wish to harm the business or the families involved. The Perrin family, she said, have been nothing but lovely. What happened? Neither scenario contemplated a unilateral sale by Jolie to a third party without Pitt consent, a scenario that all recognized was impermissible under the parties' agreements. As Jolie's counsel put it, if Pitt and Jolie could not reach a deal, Jolie would, out of necessity, have to remain in the business. So this is in quotes, which sounds that Jolie's counsel said, look, if we cannot reach a deal, then she's just going to have to stay in the business, because understanding that she can't go sell her portion without Pitt's consent. Pitt, who had invested far more in Marivelle than Jolie and saw it as one of his life's works, informed Jolie that he was not interested in selling to a third party, but would work with Perrin to acquire Jolie's share of Marivelle. Thus, through their representatives, Pitt and Perrin engaged in buyout negotiations with Jolie. So now they're starting, okay, fine, Angelina Jolie, you want us to buy you out? We'll begin negotiations. And that's what they did. They began negotiations to buy out Jolie. The contemplated transaction was structured as a sale of Nouvelle shares in Quimicom, rather than a sale of Jolie's stake in Nouveau. Okay, just different corporate ways of doing it, corporate lingo. By late February 2021, the negotiations progressed to a very advanced stage, and the parties even reached an agreement on price. Jolie would receive $46 million upfront, an additional $8.5 million over the next 6 years, and at closing, repay Pitt the $7 million that she still owed him on the 2017 loan he had provided for her new California home. So let's remember, Brad Pitt loaned her $8 million, and she already paid back $1 million. So now she owes him $7 million. So what's she going to receive up front? Well, she's going to receive up front $46 million. And then she's also going to have to repay, probably most likely, it seems like from the $46 million, she's going to have to deduct $7 million to pay back Brad Pitt. And then she is still going to receive over the next 6 years, $8.5 million. All right. The parties were still finalizing terms, including the scope of a non-disparagement clause. However, Jolie agreed to a non-disparagement clause that applied to the wine business. Okay, this is where it's going to get very important. So they're talking about a non-disparagement clause. Now, you can have, let's say, for example, you've got partners, and the partners are splitting up. And now I'm going to buy you out for a lot of money. But now you may go and start giving interviews about how terrible this business is and turn the entire public off from this business. So if you really want to sabotage the business after you got your payout, you sold your part, so you can just go disparage this entire business after you're done because you got your payout. What do you care? And you just want to get your partner back because you obviously had some sort of dispute. So therefore, it's very common to enter into non-disparagement agreements when you split up, especially when you have such a very big property like this. So they're talking about this non-disparagement clause. Now, Angelina Jolie agreed to a non-disparagement clause that applied to the wine business. So yes, we agreed. So she agreed, I'm not going to disparage the business. Not going to say how Marivelle is terrible and it's terrible wine and you don't know what goes on there. She's not going to disparage the wine business. Counsel for Pitt and Perrin, by letter sent on April 16, 2021, sought a standard non-disparagement clause that also covered the direct and indirect shareholders of the business. So now, this is what they're claiming. This is what Brad Pitt's claiming. Brad Pitt is claiming that on April 16, 2021, his counsel sent a standard, this is a standard, non-disparagement clause that also covered the direct and indirect shareholders of the business, which would include who? Obviously would include Brad Pitt and Perrin. They are direct and indirect shareholders of their business, with a clear exception for court filings and testimony. Given Pitt's close personal association with the Marivelle brand and participation in its marketing, the request was viewed as consistent with the parties' already agreed upon terms designed to protect the business. So they're claiming, again, this is Brad Pitt claiming, that look, we're just asking for a non-disparagement agreement that doesn't just cover the wine business, but also covers the direct and indirect shareholders of the business. You can't just now disparage Brad Pitt because he is such an important part of this business. You can't say, okay, I'm not going to disparage the wine business, but I'm just going to tell you how terrible Brad Pitt is. So they viewed this, Brad Pitt's team, they view this as consistent with what we're agreeing upon, that you're not going to sabotage the business. On May 9th, 2021, Jolie's counsel responded with changes that her counsel said were intended to mutualize and limit the duration of that clause, but also eliminated the attempt to protect the business by extending the clause to direct and indirect shareholders. So they responded, Angelina Jolie responded through her attorney, that they don't want that addition to the non-disparagement clause. They don't want this part of that I'm not allowed to disparage Brad Pitt individually. What does that have to do with his business? We want to protect the business also. So we're never going to disparage the wine business. But in terms of Brad Pitt himself, what does that have to do with the business? I can say what I want about my ex, right? So that was their objection. Pitt and Parents Counsel had no objection to mutualizing the clause, but endeavored to continue negotiating its duration and its coverage of direct and indirect shareholders of the business, as well as the duration of the non-compete and confidentiality clauses with which Jolie's counsel also had taken issue. But on May 12th, 2021, so when did this happen? This is going on May 9th, 2021. So May 9th, 2021, these are important dates. Angelina Jolie's counsel said, we're not doing the non-disparage agreement that cover Brad Pitt. We're only agreeing to the non-disparagement clause as it relates to the wine business, Miraval. Okay, so that's May 9th. May 12th, 2021, the private judge chosen by Pitt and Jolie to preside over the couple's custody proceedings, the very same judge who years earlier had officiated their wedding at Miraval, issued a tentative ruling following a months-long trial, finding that the existing custody order required modification at Pitt's request in the best interest of Pitt and Jolie's children. So now they're in the middle of this divorce. While this is all going on, right? They're in the middle of this divorce. And now they have this judge. And the judge comes out and says that the custody order that was previously entered has to be modified. And this was at Pitt's request. And he found, this judge, that it's in the best, I think it's a he, maybe it's a she, that it's in the best interest of Pitt and Jolie's children to be modified. And essentially what that modification was, that Brad Pitt gets 50% custody of the children. And that was modified from what was before. Before, he did not have 50% custody of the children. So this happens right after these negotiations with the non-disparage agreement between Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt. Now, right after this, May 12th, this private judge says 50-50 custody. On May 13th, 2021, the judge also issued a detailed report following his ruling that found Jolie was not credible. So whatever happened during that hearing, it was a private hearing during that custody dispute hearing, and the judge found Angelina Jolie not credible, and therefore that's why he modified the custody order, giving Brad Pitt 50% custody. Also at this time, unbeknownst to Pitt, and as set forth further below, Jolie had been simultaneously and secretly negotiating with Stoli to sell her putative 50% stake in Miraval. So now they're saying that during this whole time, Angelina Jolie was secretly bringing on this other company, Stoli. Thus, notwithstanding that Pitt and Jolie were on the cusp of striking a deal on a buyout of Jolie's stake in Miraval, they're literally discussing just the non-disparagement clause. Everything else was agreed to, it seems like. And at the same time, Angelina Jolie is secretly, and again, this is all Brad Pitt, so I'm not saying this as a fact. This is just what Brad Pitt is saying, that at the same time, Jolie was negotiating with Stoli, a separate third party, to sell her stake, her 50% stake. And this is notwithstanding that Pitt and Jolie were on the cusp of striking a deal on a buyout of Jolie's stake in Miraval on June 13th, 2021. Jolie informed counsel handling the negotiations for Pitt and Perrin through her Luxembourg attorney, Lauren Schumett, that she was stepping back from all aspects of the negotiations regarding the sale of her stake in Miraval. So now all of a sudden, she decides, you know what? I'm done. We're not talking anymore. After this custody order that the judge gave him 50%, Jolie says, okay, I'm not interested in dealing with Brad Pitt anymore. I don't want to sell him my percent. I don't want to sell my portion. This was clearly pretextual. Less than a year later, in connection with the former couple's divorce proceedings, Jolie, through divorce counsel, proposed an even broader non-disparagement clause that would have provided that other than in court pleadings or testimony, neither party shall directly or through a party's representative make in a public forum any derogatory remark about the other party. So here we have, this is not about the non-disparage. Give me a break. That is what Brad Pitt's saying here. Give me a break. This has nothing to do with the non-disparage part that you don't want. You don't want to be limited in how you're supposed to, and how you're not allowed to disparage me personally. This has nothing to do with it. You know why? Because you yourself agreed to a broader non-disparagement clause with this in the divorce proceedings that would have provided that, except in court pleadings or testimony, you cannot disparage in any public forum any remarks, any derogatory remarks about the other party. So this was your suggestion. You agreed with this. So now why all of a sudden are you saying, oh, that's the deal breaker, and therefore you're not dealing with me anymore because I want you to not disparage me in public? You agreed to this yourself. So this is what Brad Pitt is arguing. The mutual and standard clause, proposed by Pitt and Perrin, was narrower. It was even narrower than what Angelina Jolie suggested. Okay. On June 15th, 2021, Jolie's counsel informed Pitt and Perrin's counsel that Jolie was formally terminating discussions and disingenuously accused Pitt of having no intent of finalizing an agreement. This assertion was without basis and contrary to the extensive engagement by counsel for Pitt and Perrin in seeking to finalize the transaction. Indeed, in order to fund the buyout, Perrin had secured a substantial loan on extremely favorable terms, and he and Pitt were eager to close the deal, so they were all ready. And they just got everything pulled out from underneath them. Okay, so they said, we are done. And now this is what they say. Pretext is in place. Schumer, which is acting on behalf of Jolie, concluded his letter on behalf of Jolie with a disavowal of Jolie's obligations to Pitt. We consider ourselves free from any negotiations with you. Meaning, because you're being so difficult, we're trying to abide by what we're required to by giving you the offer of first refusal, but because you're being so difficult, you're making it impossible for us to deal with you. So therefore, we consider ourselves that we did what we're supposed to do under the contract, under the law, under everything that we considered, and now we are free to pursue any other transactions that we would deem appropriate to undertake. And that's what the attorney for Angelina Jolie sent to Brad Pitt's attorney, and then that's it. Okay. And then what happens? So Jolie secretly negotiates the sale of interest in Miraval to the Stoli Group, a Russia-affiliated spirits conglomerate. So to make a longer story shorter now, because now we got the main points out, what happens then is Angelina Jolie goes and sells her part, her 50% stake, to this Russian-affiliated group, Stoli Group, who's controlled by a Russian oligarch, Yuri Shefler, and Shefler is just terrible. And that's how they make out this complaint to be, that he's just terrible, and that he has a terrible reputation, and he's literally going to destroy and sabotage this entire business of Brad Pitt. And then he's trying to get all of their contracts, and he's really, really making havoc. He's wreaking havoc with Miraval, with this business that Brad Pitt worked so hard to build up and make profitable. And now Shefler, who is just this terrible, terrible reputation, ties to Russia and ties to Putin and all of this thing. So therefore and that's what they go on to explain in this complaint, and is really, really destroying the entire business. And that's what happened. He destroyed this entire business. And therefore, that's where it all comes out. And essentially the argument is that Angelina Jolie breached this agreement by going outside Brad Pitt without his consent, without his knowledge, and sold her parts in breach of their agreement to this third party. Okay, so that is essentially what the complaint is about, and now destroyed the business. So now his business was worth, who knows, hundreds of millions of dollars, and now the business is not worth that much anymore. And his life's been completely turned upside down, at least Brad Pitt. Okay, so now that is essentially what the allegations are from Brad Pitt. Now we're still not up to what does it have to do with abuse? What does it have to do with physical abuse? So, okay, these are all legal arguments, and there's some corporate law here, there's some tort law here, there's some arguments to be made, and okay, but what does it have to do with these alleged abuse? So let's bring this up. We're going to bring up the motion to compel, and this is the motion to compel that was filed by Angelina Jolie's team, and they wanted these records, they wanted these documents, and this is the explanation that they gave to the judge why they believe it's important to be able to discover these documents which show the abusive person that Brad Pitt was. Okay, this is can't go to character testimony, right? So let's see how this has any sort of relevance to what's going on. So here we go. In September 2016, Angelina Jolie. So now we're going to be hearing Angelina Jolie's side. Okay, so we're going to be hearing a lot from her side now. In September 2016, Angelina Jolie filed to divorce Brad Pitt. In February 2021, to further their separation, and after extensive negotiations, Jolie agreed to sell Pitt her half interest in Chateau Miraval, the French property she and Pitt co-purchased in 2008 as a family home and business. Okay, that we've heard about up until now. As part of that sale, Jolie agreed to a relatively standard non-disparagement clause limited to not disparaging Miraval's wine business. So now right away you're seeing that they are calling standard different, right? Brad Pitt is saying standard includes a non-disparagement clause of the directors and the direct and indirect directors of the company. And Jolie is saying, no, the standard is not that. Standard is just to not disparage Miraval's wine business. If that sale had been completed, this lawsuit never would have happened. But at the last minute, Pitt stepped back from his agreement to buy Jolie's interest in Miraval and the deal collapsed. Whoa. Okay, that's not what we heard up until now. What we heard up until now is that Angelina Jolie stepped away because she didn't like this non-disparagement agreement, right? That's what it seems from the complaint. And now Angelina Jolie is saying, no, actually, that's not what happened. What happened is that Brad Pitt was the one who stepped back from his agreement to buy Jolie's interest in Miraval and the deal collapsed. The question at the heart of this case and at the center of this motion is why. Why did Brad Pitt step away from this deal? They're about ready. They already negotiated everything. Who's ever going to walk away from this deal, whoever was the one who's proven, and this is how it's going to be very interesting. Whoever is proven to walk away from this deal, the question is why? Why did you walk away? That is the question. So they're obviously, the Angelina Jolie's team they're saying Pitt is the one who stepped back. And now this is going to be the explanation to why they believe Brad Pitt stepped away from this deal. So here we go. The answer is that Pitt stepped back because on March 12th, 2021, as part of the couple's ongoing child custody dispute, Jolie filed for the judge's eyes only 2 offers of proof detailing the evidence of Pitt's domestic violence against Jolie and their children. Okay, so now they are intertwining the custody battle into this lawsuit because they're claiming that what happened in that custody hearing and why this judge made his rulings, and eventually we're going to see what happened with that case. But what happened was that they're talking about custody, and Angelina Jolie filed under seal 2 offers of proof showing evidence of Brad Pitt's domestic violence against Angelina Jolie and their children. And now Brad Pitt got nervous from those offers of proof, from that evidence. He doesn't like that. So now let's continue. When Jolie filed the evidence in the custody suit, she was careful to file it under seal so that no member of the public could see it. But Jolie's sealed filing, which included emails, summaries of the family's expected testimony, and other evidence, caused Pitt to fear that the information could eventually become public. Now, obviously, the last thing that Brad Pitt wants is for any of this testimony or evidence to become public for people to hear if he allegedly abused anybody. Domestic violence. For the previous 5 years, and to protect their children's health and privacy, Jolie had never revealed to the public any details of Pitt's abuse and related efforts to cover it up. So this is going on 5 years, but Angelina Jolie did not want to reveal that to the public. She didn't do any interviews with any magazines or TV stations to let them know that she's really a victim. She didn't do any of that. Why? Because she wanted to protect her children. That's what they're arguing here. Nevertheless, Pitt was no longer willing to rely on Jolie's voluntary efforts to preserve the family's privacy, and now demanded that Jolie contractually bind herself to that silence. So even though for the past 5 years, Angelina Jolie was not coming out and saying anything that happened, all of the abuse that she allegedly had, she did not say a word about it. But now that she filed these documents with the court, now all of a sudden Brad Pitt's getting nervous. Hey, maybe she's going to break her silence and let everybody know what type of monster I am, I guess. And therefore, I need a way to contractually bind her to silence, an NDA. To effectuate this demand, Pitt changed course and suddenly conditioned his purchase of Jolie's share of Miraval on her agreeing to a greatly expanded NDA, now covering Pitt's personal misconduct, whether related to Miraval or not. So now that's what changed. That's why all of a sudden Brad Pitt changed it. Before they, again, this is Angelina Jolie talking now. Before they had a non-disparagement to limited to the company. But now all of a sudden these documents are filed, and all of a sudden Brad Pitt says, hold on a second, wait a minute. Now I have to think about this. Maybe now she's going to say how bad of a person I am, that I'm really an abuser. Now that we're going to be divorced and now we have this custody battle and I'm winning, I'm going to get 50%. Now she may start disparaging me. Well, now that's why he wanted her to now expand the non-disparagement agreement. To Jolie, Pitt's demand for a new sweeping NDA was a culmination of years of denial and cover-up, and a stinging affirmation of his inability to appreciate how his conduct had so greatly damaged their family. For years, Pitt had used Jolie's voluntary silence against her, relying on it to deny his misconduct, cover up his dishonesty with authorities, and gaslight her and their children in the press, all to protect his own career and interests. His actions were deeply hurtful, prevented the children from receiving appropriate care for victims of domestic violence, and greatly undermined Jolie's and their children's efforts to heal. But that was only part of the reason the new NDA was so hurtful. When Jolie and their children left Maryville that day in September 2016, they departed with only their suitcases, and in the intervening years, not one has felt able to return. Yet, despite losing Maryville and similarly giving up their Los Angeles family home to Pitt, Jolie never requested a penny of alimony. Instead, she set a course for her family to heal and declined numerous career opportunities to make sure that happened. So now they're painting this picture of Angelina Jolie finally getting out of this terrible marriage with this abusive husband, and now all she wants is to heal. She just wants her family to heal. She wants to heal. She's turning down. She doesn't care about alimony. She doesn't care about career opportunities. She's declining them all. She just wants to heal and wants her family to heal. Rather than credit Jolie for her efforts to help the family heal from his abuse, Pitt took advantage of her focus on the family and absence from Maryville to cement his control over the winery, all while simultaneously refusing to distribute any profits to Jolie. So now he's the bad guy. He's not distributing any of the profits that she's entitled to, even though you're right, she's not doing any work on it, but still she has a ownership interest in the profits, and he's not giving her a dime of it. Again, this is Angelina Jolie allegation. By 2021, Pitt knew that Jolie needed to sell her share of Maryville for many reasons, not least of which was so she could secure her financial independence from her ex-husband. When Pitt tried to take advantage of Jolie's position by refusing to buy her interest in Maryville unless she agreed to his controlling and punishing NDA, this nearly broke her. In response to his callous and mean-spirited demand, Jolie rejected Pitt's new NDA, but still gave Pitt one last chance to buy her interest on the already agreed upon terms, including the original NDA covering the business only. Look, she said, look, you're creating this new NDA because you're telling me that now you're trying to force me into silence for the rest of my life, that I can never talk about the abuse that happened to me and the children. This has nothing to do with the business. You want me to sell the business? I'm happy to not disparage the business. And she gave him one more chance. On June 2nd, 2021, Pitt responded by proposing an even harsher version of his expanded NDA. With his choice made on June 15th, 2021, Jolie notified. So now he's expanding it even more. So that's it. On June 15, 2020, Jolie notified Pitt in writing that she intended to explore a sale to third parties. So this wasn't secret. I've let you know, look, you're being impossible. I can't deal with you. And therefore, I am going to explore a sale to third parties. And in October 2021, she sold her interest to a subsidiary of the Stoli Group. Pitt retaliated by suing her. For his part, Pitt had an entirely different story. He alleges that Jolie walked away from the deal in anger over a supposed adverse ruling in their child custody case. Remember what happened in that case? And remember how he said that all of a sudden, when the judge ruled in his favor that he gets 50% custody, that's when Angelina Jolie all of a sudden got mad, and that was a pretext. And now she has she's walking. She's gonna sell it to a third party. That's what he claimed. Listen to this. Putting aside that Pitt's timeline does not work, as that child custody ruling was issued 7 weeks after Pitt stepped back from the deal. So first of all, your timeline is completely off because, again, this is Angelina Jolie arguing back. Your timeline is so off because that happened. That ruling was 7 weeks after the deal blew up. So obviously it wasn't because of the custody ruling that the judge made. And not only that, but it was promptly reversed on appeal in Jolie's favor. So this order that you're getting all excited about, Brad Pitt, this order was only in effect for a couple of months maybe, because it was promptly reversed on appeal in Jolie's favor. Pitt nonetheless claims that because of that short-lived ruling, Jolie was the one who took vindictive, 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 vindictive and mean-spirited actions against him. I've been reading for too long. Vindictive and mean-spirited actions against him. He claims Jolie's decision to sell to someone else after he backed out of the deal to buy her shares himself was so reprehensible that she should be punished with punitive damages. To prove her claims and defenses, Jolie needs to prove why Pitt was so fixated on forcing her to agree his expansive NDA. All of a sudden, why are you expanding this NDA? What got you so fixated on expanding the NDA, and why Pitt's demand was so hurtful to her? One of the most powerful ways to prove this is to demonstrate what Pitt was trying to hide. To defend herself from Pitt's allegations, Jolie served related requests for documents. For 8 months, listen to this. For 8 months, Pitt refused to produce a single responsive document and only recently offered to produce a small portion on condition that Jolie not seek the rest of this powerful evidence. He even threatened to seek sanctions against Jolie if she did not accept his last-minute offer. But the evidence Pitt refuses to produce is highly relevant and likely to lead to the discovery of further admissible evidence. Jolie now brings this motion to compel Pitt to produce all of this evidence. The court should order him to promptly do so. So now, again, they go through some of the factual allegations that we already went through a lot already on the video. Let's move ahead. Okay, now listen to this. Pitt's abuse and cover-up. While Pitt's history of physical abuse of Jolie started well before the family's September 2016 plane trip from France to Los Angeles, this flight marked the first time he turned his physical abuse on the children as well. And there's this flight that happened in September 2016, which was the last straw for Jolie. And why is that? Because he turned his physical abuse on the children as well. Jolie then immediately left him. The cross complaint, relying in part on a lengthy and detailed FBI report, describes some of the most egregious facts Pitt was hoping to bury. Jolie has always felt these details should have remained private, and even for this motion, she thinks it is best not to restate them publicly and instead respectfully directs the court to her previous filed allegations, the cross complaint, which I was not able to see. But as a very short summary, the cross complaint describes a father's terrifying actions against his family, including children as young as 8 years old, on a chartered flight where the family literally had no place to run and no place to hide. The conduct is egregious and caused significant and ongoing post-traumatic stress. At trial, Jolie will prove through testimony, emails, photographs, and other evidence why Pitt was so concerned about his own misconduct that he blew up his own deal to purchase Jolie's interest in Miraval because she refused to agree to his new expansive NDA. Some of that evidence is currently under Pitt's control. This is the evidence Jolie seeks by this motion. So this evidence is not, she needs it from Pitt. He has it. He's got this evidence showing about his conversations and communications about this abuse. Also relevant to this motion is what happened after the family finally got off that plane. When the flight landed, unbeknownst to Jolie, a still unknown flight crew member reported Pitt's violence to the authorities. So this unknown flight crew member reported what Brad Pitt did on that flight to the authorities. The FBI and the Department of Children and Family Services then independently opened investigations, and both agencies conducted interviews. The FBI found probable cause to charge Pitt with a federal crime. Although the U.S. Attorney's Office ultimately declined to press charges, the FBI's later internal review concluded that the investigation and the charging decision repeatedly violated Jolie's and their children's victims' rights. Through it all, Jolie never pressed charges, as she believed the best course was for Pitt to accept responsibility and help the family recover from the post-traumatic stress he caused. So they are really literally saying that Angelina Jolie here was a saint. She endured all this abuse and even saw her children be abused, but she did not press charges because she believed that the way to help her family recover was to not press charges. It was just for Pitt to accept responsibility. Sadly, that did not happen. Instead, Pitt denied his abuse to authorities while simultaneously allowing unnamed close sources to publicly deny that abuse for him, all while privately denying the children appropriate trauma-related care. So now he completely took no responsibility. He didn't help the children with, getting them help for this type of abuse that they endured at his hand, and none of what she hoped to happen would happen. Still, Jolie never publicly discussed Pitt's actions and instead continued to focus on helping their children physically and emotionally heal. Now, what happened at the custody hearing? Here we go. After their separation, Jolie agreed to joint custody and never sought sole custody, believing Pitt would come to understand the harm he perpetrated, undergo the counseling California requires of those who abuse family members, and allow their family to heal even as the parties were no longer together. She assumed that he would just understand and come to the understanding himself and undergo the counseling, and he would just take care of himself. She still holds this hope for treatment and healing for their family, but Pitt never came to this understanding and not only sought 50-50 custodial time. So it wasn't 50-50 at this point. Jolie agreed to joint custody, but not 50-50. But Pitt never came to this understanding and not only sought 50-50 custodial time, including with children with whom he had not had a stable relationship in years, but also sought sole custody if the children did not sufficiently bond with him. Despite this distressing request, Jolie still did not seek sole custody. Instead, she advocated that the children's wishes and needs be prioritized, based in part on what the children felt they could do, and for a custody plan formulated in the children's best interest to heal. The parties previously agreed to adjudicate this custody issue using a retired private judge, the Honorable John Orderkirk. In California, every judge, including a private judge, has an ethical duty to disclose all personal and professional relationships with the parties and their counsel, including personal and financial ties that would lead a reasonable person to question the judge's objectivity. So as a judge, you are required, even if you're a private judge, you're required to, as an ethical duty, to disclose any personal or professional relationships with either party. So if you have a relationship with one of the parties, you got to tell the other party, hey, I have some sort of relationship with them. But as the custody hearing approached, Jolie learned that Judge Orderkirk, so this custody hearing, which they had with Judge Orderkirk, and you're right, she initially said, no problem, we'll use this judge. But she didn't realize that he had financial dealings with Pitt's attorneys. So as the custody hearing approached, Jolie learned that Judge Orderkirk had significant yet undisclosed financial dealings with Pitt's attorneys. Once Jolie forced the judge to belatedly disclose his significant financial conflicts, she sought to disqualify him. And on November 20th, 2020, she filed a petition in the Court of Appeal to force his disqualification. So she's asking a higher court, hey, I didn't realize this, but this judge actually has some financial dealings with the other Brad Pitt's attorneys. And therefore, he has to disqualify himself, and he never disclosed that to me. But while the petition was still pending, so now this petition is pending in the Court of Appeals, but while that petition is still pending, Brad Pitt demanded the custody hearing go forward anyway. So while that's pending in the Court of Appeals to see whether this judge has to disqualify himself, Brad Pitt's attorneys demanded that the custody hearing go forward while that's pending. Well, okay, so it went forward. Judge Orderkirk agreed with Pitt, and over Jolie's objection, that hearing went forward on various dates from January to March 2021. In this hearing that was closed to the public, Jolie sought to introduce evidence of Pitt's history of physical abuse. Now you have a custody hearing. This is where physical abuse is extremely relevant. So you have a custody hearing, and now Angelina Jolie, during that custody hearing with this private judge, wants to introduce evidence of Pitt's history of physical abuse of the family and control abuse of Jolie. Family and control abuse of Jolie, as well as evidence of Pitt's conduct toward the children. Some of their children over 14 years old sought to testify on their preferences on child custody. So now some of the kids wanted to say who they'd rather be with. Maybe they were going to say, I'd rather be with Angelina Jolie and not Brad Pitt, which they have a right to do per Family Code Section 3042. But Pitt objected to allowing their input. So now Brad Pitt's attorneys, family law attorneys, said, no, we object to the children testifying. Despite the legal relevance and obvious importance of Pitt's physical abuse of his own children and the children's preferences on custody, Judge Orderkirk sided with Pitt and refused to allow any children to give their testimony, even in a closed hearing, and despite their wish to speak. To perfect her right to appeal Judge Orderkirk's biased and facially unfair ruling on March 12, 2021, Jolie filed two related evidentiary proffers: an offer of proof and authority re-testimony regarding domestic violence, and two, an offer of proof and authority re-testimony regarding testimony of minor children. So she is going to say, look, you're not going to allow me to put on this evidence? Well, I'm going to give a proffer. And that way it's in the record, and now I can appeal it. To ensure that no member of the public could access these documents, Jolie filed both proffers under seal. So when these were filed under seal, we don't have access to them. So that's what happened. Now, while the custody phase of their divorce was proceeding, Jolie and Pitt were simultaneously negotiating how to end their business relationship at Miraval. On February 25th, 2021, after extensive negotiations, Jolie and Pitt reached an agreement where Pitt would purchase Jolie's interest for $54.5 million. The agreement included a simple non-disparagement clause relating to the wine business. Okay, this is on February 25th, 2021, and the agreement includes this non-disparagement clause. After reaching this agreement, the parties started the process of reducing it to writing. In the midst of this drafting process, on March 12th, 2021, so now, again, this is February 25th it started. Now they're putting it into writing, and then when they're putting this into writing, the non-disparagement agreement was limited to relating to the wine business. Well, now, March 12th, 2021 comes, and what happens? Angelina Jolie files her offers of proof under seal in the custody court with this private judge, where you see from there the abuse that Brad Pitt was inflicting on the kids and herself, and also the other issue that she wanted to file under seal, the kids' testimony. The sealed filings prompted nearly daily phone calls between Jolie's European lawyer, Lauren Schumann, and Pitt's European lawyer, Frank Lementek. Okay, in these calls, Lementek expressed relief that Jolie had not shared any information publicly. Okay, so he was very relieved that it wasn't public. She filed it under seal, but also conveyed that Pitt was extremely worried about public disclosure of the facts disclosed in the offers of proof. Obviously, he would be very worried about that. On March 18th and again on March 26th, 2021, Lementek notified Schumer that for these reasons, Pitt wished to step back from the agreement. So who's stepping back? This is in quotes, which means that this is actually in writing. So an attorney for Brad Pitt is saying he wants to step back from the agreement. Now, don't make this about Angelina Jolie stepping back from the agreement. This is actually Brad Pitt stepping back from the agreement. On April 6th, 2021, Schumer summarized and outlined these discussions in a letter, writing that Jolie was upset and hurt that the deal was not moving forward. Most hurtful to her of all, Schumer wrote, was the reasoning given and the reference made to recent reports that during sealed legal proceedings currently taking place in California, Jolie had submitted offers of proof relating to domestic violence. Schumer knew exactly what this step back was: economic coercion and silencing, and noted in his letter, the position taken comes close to an attempt to influence the course of future events relating to those or other proceedings by suggesting that any public knowledge of information regarding the family situation would be a reason for abrogating the agreement. What stood out was the fact that information regarding domestic violence is not or should not be new to all the parties concerned. Instead, as Schumer emphasized, the only development is the presentation of evidence to the court. Schumer noted that Jolie had never publicly spoken about Pitt's abuse behavior and has no intention of speaking. Nevertheless, on April 16, 2021, Pitt responded by sending a revised offer to purchase Jolie's share in Miraval that contained a new, expansive NDA. That new NDA required Jolie to make a commitment not to publicly denigrate Miraval Province and its direct and indirect shareholders, including Brad Pitt. Okay, and remove the previously agreed upon limitation that the NDA cover only Miraval's business. In response, on May 9th, 2021, Schumer sent a revised offer to Lementek in which he politely but forcefully refused the new language by spelling out that the NDA had to be limited to a spirit of mutual assurance relating to Miraval, which was what the parties had agreed to already in February. So who's the one changing it? That's Brad Pitt. He's changing it. Schumer also provided a new NDA that expressly covered Miraval's business and not Pitt's personal conduct. Each party undertakes to not publicly and intentionally denigrate the business or solely in their role and capacity pertaining to the business, its direct and indirect shareholdings, including Ms. Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, etc. For 3 years, the maximum length printed by law. On May 13th, 2021, after Pitt already stepped back from the Miraval deal and demanded the new all-encompassing NDA, that is when Judge Oderkirk issued a tentative ruling in the custody case. So this was not as a result of the judge. This happened all before the judge's ruling. So that's what they're trying to show here. You're making up this idea that the judge made this ruling and then Angelina Jolie was the one who backed out of the deal because she had this pretext. No, that's not what happened. Judge Oderkirk actually issued this ruling after Pitt was the one who stepped back from their deal. Through this period, Pitt never formally responded to Jolie's May 9th offer. On May 28, 2021, Schumer gave notice to Lementek that the May 9th proposal without the personal NDA was the final one and gave Pitt until May 31st, 2021 to accept it. So Angelina Jolie's attorney is saying, look, this is the final NDA. Okay, this is one that we're going to be doing. We're not going to be doing the expansive NDA. This is the one you have till May 31st to accept it. On May 30th, 2021, Jolie had still not heard back from Pitt and lamented the original February 25th, 2021 agreement's imminent collapse. I've tried to sell Maribel to Brad as per our agreement, but he's really not being fair and also a lot of punishing restrictions. On June 2nd, 2021, Lamentic sent over a further revised proposal, but rather than move toward Jolie's position, Pitt now demanded an even more onerous NDA. So now on June 2nd, even though he was supposed to respond by May 31st, now they respond by June 2nd and they propose a even more onerous NDA. Well, what do you think about this is going to happen? By design, the new expansive NDA prohibited Jolie from speaking about Pitt's abuse of Jolie and their children by attempting to tie Pitt's personal reputation to Maribel's business. Jolie refused to sign it, and by June 3rd, 2022, the deal was dead. So that's essentially the argument here. And this is why in this motion to compel, this is what Angelina Jolie is arguing. They're saying, look, we need to show you that what was really going on is that Brad Pitt was abusing me and he was abusing the children. And it was years of abuse. And this information just was filed by the court. We just filed it under seal. And that's why he stepped away from this deal. That is the entire case. So since that's our entire case, we need to be able to discover those documents which are going to show you the abuse, and which is why essentially he stepped away from this deal. So now we see why this is all connected very deeply to this case, why this evidence of any alleged abuse that was inflicted by Brad Pitt onto his family is extremely, extremely relevant to what happened in this specific case. Because the ultimate question is, who stepped away from the deal, who was being difficult to deal with, and why? And this is why the Angelina Jolie side just scored a tremendous victory, because the judge agreed with Angelina Jolie that they're able to discover these documents. So a lot of this information now is going to come out, and it may be extremely damaging to Brad Pitt, not just maybe in this legal sense, but also if this actually gets into the public, then it's obviously going to paint him in a very, very negative light. So that's what's going on in the Brad Pitt Angelina Jolie case. A very interesting case, and we will see as this goes on. Discovery's open. Brad Pitt's deposition is going to be taken. There's probably going to be all over the place, all over the news. And if you really want to get the correct analysis on this to make everything understandable and really understand the law behind this, then you got to keep it tuned to Brother Counsel's channel. So that's going to be it for now. Hopefully it wasn't too long-winded for all of you. Thought maybe this may go on for 2 hours, but we tried to get through it pretty quickly. Obviously, if I would have read everything, we wouldn't have been here all night. But that's going to be it for now. Please, if you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, and we will see you next time.